Here's every tier 6 battleship, and today we're going to pick out the best ones to try in the upcoming brawls. This latest season is very unique in fact, as they're going to be like standard battles with 12 versus 12 games, but it's only battleships. We'll pick out the top ships broken down into 4 key sections: guns and caliber, armour, secondaries, and other. The first 3 are quite self-explanatory, then the other section will be things such as fast cooldowns, unique consumables, and anything else that could give you a bit of an advantage in this game mode. If you just wanted a summary, then that'll be it to the end of the video. As I don't want to take up your time, we'll look at the top ships by guns. One of the key aspects to look at is the caliber, as this determines how much armor you can overmatch, which in a game mode where every opponent is a battleship, there's going to be a lot of them facing you nose in, so you're going to want to get through that. For reference, on screen is every ship's bow thickness, which you may want to screenshot for later, just as a quick reference for when you're in battle, but at this tier the best picks are going to be any that can overmatch 26mm of armor or above. There's only 2 that can get through 28mm, and those are Mutsu and West Virginia, but below this all the British battleships and Bayern can get through 26mm, which is almost all the ships they'll face. So if that was one of your main points, then those are some that you'll want to choose. Now, since we've just explained how useful overmatch can be, the first pick is going to be the one that has some of the lowest overmatch values at the tier, and you might have already guessed it, and that is Dunkirk. The guns are still great due to the impressive shell speed and penetration. Out of the 18 battleships, Dunkirk has the top shell impact speed, the shortest shell flight time, and therefore the fastest shells, which gives it incredibly high penetration, which is exactly what you need. Although it can only overmatch 23mm of armor, which isn't good for people bowing, it can however do serious damage to anything else that it can pen, plus it's got a pretty unique layout with everything focused to the front. On the other hand, picking between the 2 top caliber ships, we've got Mutsu and West Virginia. Honestly, I'd recommend either since they're both decent picks, just it really depends on how you're going to use them. If you want range, Mutsu will be perfect as it has the 3rd highest range at the tier, plus a spotter plane, but with that you do sacrifice shell penetration, leading to more ricochets at longer distances. If you're happy staying at medium range and using a spotted plane for longer distance shots, West Virginia will probably be the better choice, with it having the highest shell penetration at the tier. The only thing is, sometimes it can really feel like a glass cannon. In terms of hitting your shells, they've got the same sigma and relatively similar dispersion values. Now, as I said earlier, there are going to be all 4 of the British battleships that can get through that 26mm of armour, but when it comes to guns, Repulse does come with a big disadvantage, which is a low barrel count. That's not an issue however, as it's also got the highest sigma and the lowest dispersion of all tier 6 battleships, plus joint second in how fast it can reload, which in my opinion makes up for the low barrel count. Of course, this still is personal preference, so if you enjoy playing the others a lot more than you do Repulse, then of course just play that one. But for this video, I'm going to stick Repulse as one of the picks. Of course, if you weren't bothered about pinpoint accuracy, but like the sound of smacking everything in a general area from a serious range, then Fuso is another great pick. It's got 12 main batteries and the highest range of 21.8 kilometers. Although it has only got a sigma of 1.5 and pretty high dispersion, that shouldn't be an issue since you've got so many guns that you're firing anyway. Plus, every time that I've played in Fuso, I've usually had some pretty decent results. Now, if you don't like the sound of people being able to thwomp you regardless of your angle, that moves us on to the next section, which is armour, and for the most part we're mainly going to be looking at the bow armour since that's going to be the most useful when you're going nose in, but also belt armour as well because that's going to be something useful for when you want to bounce your shots when you're at close range. First off, Ismail has got incredibly strong bow armour with 113 to 181mm from the waterline and 26 above that, which of course can get overmatched, so you're pretty safe there, but the belt's also quite strong, sitting at 300mm thick. Now next up we've got Bayern, which is also pretty great all around since only a small portion of the upper bow can be overmatched, with the rest of it being covered in 30, 150 and 200mm of armour, whilst the armour belt has areas of 250 to 350mm, so both can bow tank and bounce shots. Since they've got similar layouts, both Arizona and New Mexico are great here too. Although the bow is 26mm, the rest of the layout is pretty tanky. The armor belt sits at 343mm, And if something gets through that, it's also got a low citadel, which is harder to hit, so again, that's really going to add to the survivability of the ship. Finally, Fuso is also somewhat protected on the front with some 102mm plates, but if you do get unlucky, a shell could get through the middle, but that's all down to chance. As for the belt, that's also pretty thick too, sitting at 305mm on the waterline, so again, seems like a pretty decent pick. Moving on to the best secondary ships, it's no secret that range is paramount, and therefore German battleships somewhat hold the monopoly, with the exception of the French matching the German range, but their shells do have lower penetration values. It's safe to say the undisputed top dog when it comes to secondaries is going to be PE Friedrich, which boasts the joint highest firing range, the second highest DPM, and the joint top HE penetration, which really that's all that needs to be said. It's a great secondary boat and is going to be the first pick for secondaries. Of course, that is a premium ship, so if you wanted a similar level of performance but didn't want to buy a premium, then there is also the option of Bayern. Initially when writing this, I was going to say Mackensen as they are very similar ships, but looking at the stats, Bayern would actually be a better choice since it's got the same joint firing range, the same joint top HE penetration, and has a higher DPM too. Alongside that, it's also really well armoured, as previously mentioned, and has some decent guns. I will however include Mackensen too, purely for the fact that it still has range, and has access to those 150mm secondaries, which will still do decent damage compared to other ships, so it still makes the list. Excluding Normandy and Dunkirk, past this point it's more about personal preference since they've all got the same range, and more it's just a fact of if you're willing to sacrifice the bonuses you get to your main batteries, you instead go for a secondary build. But if we're going to go by stats, the best ship to build for secondaries that hasn't already been listed is going to be Mutsu. It's got the highest secondary DPM of all ships, whilst having improved secondary dispersion, which means that you're also going to be hitting a lot more shells on average, so could be a decent secondary boat. But again, there's the question of whether you want to sacrifice improving your main batteries for it, and you're also going to suffer in terms of range because you're not going to get the same top range as the German ships do. And finally, we've got Other, which is anything a ship has that'll give it a 1-up in battle. Starting off, we've got Repulse. This is simply because it's really quick, and not only that, it comes with an 8% speed boost. This will be perfect for this game mode as there won't be destroyers covering flanks, just battleships, so you can rapidly move up, get into advantageous positions far before your enemies can, and then you can give them a real surprise and you a real advantage. The next up, we've got Issei. If you don't know what the ship is, well, you're in for a surprise, as carriers have snuck into this battleship only mode. I've already covered this in a previous video, but Issei is a great boat. On the back there is a flight deck which you can launch a squadron of torpedo bombers with a cooldown between launches, which can give you a real advantage and therefore is in this section. You can use the bombers to force an enemy to show their side, as if they're facing you head on, you can launch your torpedo bombers, go for the side of them, which they should try and turn into, which is sort of good practice, and once they've turned into those torpedoes, that's going to show you some side, where you can lob some shots in and deal a hefty chunk of damage. And if they don't turn in, then that's just free damage from the torpedoes, and you could even potentially get a flooding. Finally, it's probably no surprise that Mutsu is in here again too. Alongside all the other points raised, Mutsu is one of the 2 ships of this tier that's got access to torpedoes. You're probably thinking, why not just go with Renown, since that has double the number, and while that's a good point, the reason why I'd pick Mutsu is for the range and reload. Mutsu's got 7km torpedoes that reload every 21 seconds, and they're faster, so when you're getting in close or you're in a duel, you're going to be able to launch your torpedoes, and if somehow you're both alive after they reload, you can just send off another set and you'll probably win that engagement. With everything covered, here's a summary of the top picks for each category. For the main batteries, we've got Dunkirk, Mutsu, West Virginia, Repulse, and Fuso. For secondaries, we've got the PE Friedrich, Bayern, Mackensen, and Mutsu. For Armour, we've got Ismail, Bayern, Arizona, New Mexico, and Fuso. For Other, we've got Repulse, Issei, and Mutsu. And then, from all of that, the top 5 overall, or at least in my opinion, is going to be Mutsu, PE Friedrich, Bayern, Issei, and Repulse. Of course, there are 18 ships to choose from, so instead of just going with the most effective ships, you could just try and do what I'm doing, which is playing every single one, and see what you have the most fun in, since that's kind of the point of these funky modes. But if you have made it this far into the video, I thank you for supporting the channel and hope I've been able to help you, but with all that said, I'll see you in the next one.